off limits, man. Whoa. Okay, calm down.
There's some critics in the chat, and sometimes we ignore them, but I actually think it can be useful to sometimes highlight their talking points, because I think they should be, responded to and when appropriate, debunked. So someone in the chat wrote, show me one person not connected in some way to Hezbollah who suffered injuries. And then he wrote, and yes, the Iranian ambassador is a Hezbollah asset. So what are your responses to those arguments?
Well, first of all, we already heard from Rania that civilians who were close to the people who were targeted were also injured. We don't know the total death toll and injury toll. I've seen horrendous footage of people with all of their fingers blown off, with holes in their abdomen, with all sorts of really grave wounds. Some of those are civilians as well. Secondly, whether you like the Iranian ambassador or whether he has a relationship with Hezbollah does not make him a target under international law. To the contrary, he is a protected person. And so that is a crime in targeting him as well. Also, I understand that Israel and the United States have declared that Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. It's not a terrorist organization under international law. It hasn't been found to be a terrorist body in that respect. And even if you want to say that about combatants from Hezbollah, as I already pointed out, Hezbollah is also a political party and a part of the government in Lebanon. It also runs programs in Lebanon. So those people are civilians. Not the combatants are combatants, but the others are civilians. That's unlawful to attack them in this way as well. So you don't have a get out of jail free card just by saying we consider those people to be terrorists, so anyone associated with them can be killed. I will remind the person in the chat that there are people all over the world that consider Israel to be a terrorist entity.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that everyone associated, civilians, with terrorists is a legitimate target, including their defenders in the West and so on. They are not. Israeli combatants are legitimate targets, but not civilians who are part of that society or who defend it or whatever. If we didn't have these rules, then we are all soldiers and we are all targets. And if you want to see what that kind of world looks like, then situate yourself in the middle of Europe in the early 1940s and see how that goes.
I'm sure he would not be okay with someone killing someone associated with the Israeli government or the Israeli army, the IDF, which obviously engages in terrorism. It's not a difficult thing to determine. We had Noor Erekat on, a human rights lawyer, and she pointed out that Israel, and their defenders admit that they're engaging in terrorism because they say they'll do certain things or stop doing certain things if Hamas releases the prisoners, as if that justifies their assaults on civilians. I think it speaks to the entitlement and the way that double standards are just so embraced that no one actually thinks that what they're asking for and what they're defending would ever be done to the people that they like. Like this person is talking about how it's, it's someone's kid, it's the father's fault. Well, would it be the fault of an Israeli IDF member or Israeli politician if their kid were killed? I don't think this person would think that.
I mean, that's the whole basis of the international legal framework, is that it's based upon humanity, right? It applies to everybody. These are the rules.
Right.
And if you want to be lawful, you follow these rules. If you want to be barbaric, then you just say it's my tribe and the hell with everybody else.
Right.
And we've seen this. I mean, it's amazing in social media. I have to say, I have to look away from social media, X and others, because the horrific things that I will see where people are just defending horror. So, for example, I mean, to your point, if I tweet something about a massive war crime perpetrated in Gaza on a given day, in my comments, I'll have a bunch of people say, well, then release the hostages,
Yeah,
or, you shouldn't mess around. So in other words, they're saying it's okay that they're slaughtering civilians because this other thing has happened. What kind of human beings are these, and what kind of a world are they trying to create in which that's the way the rules work? And I think that's, I've said this before, it's the Palestinians are on the front lines in all of this, and the Lebanese as well. But the entire international system and the safety of all of us is also on the line, and it's being sacrificed, over the course of the last 10, 11 months in ways that we hadn't seen it before, although there are periods in history where we have come close. and we all have a stake in this, all of us.
Okay, one more thing I want to read you, just because I want you to respond to it. So one of the people killed apparently was a 9-year-old girl whose father was in Hezbollah. So one of our haters says in the comments, her father put his entire family in danger because of his hatred of Jews, which again, that's embracing terrorism, right? Like the literal logic of terrorism. There's no rule of law. There's no respect for international humanitarian law. And here is apparently the little girl, the 9-year-old. Fatima Jafar Abdullah, 9 years old. So
Well,
that's her.
So absurd on so many levels. I mean, first of all, if you're not a human being, you can't look at that kid and think that shouldn't have happened.
Right.
Secondly, Hezbollah is not an organization that exists out of hatred of Jews. I mean, that little rhetorical device used to justify every kind of atrocity, you would think that by now the people who use it would realize it doesn't work on anyone.
Right.
People are more sophisticated. They know that Hezbollah is not an organization that is dedicated to hatred of Jews. Secondly, that Israel does not represent the Jewish people, as we've said so many times in our conversations. So that's utter nonsense. And then the other thing is that it was entirely foreseeable that if you just willy-nilly put bombs in people's personal devices, that their children, their spouses, perfect strangers who they're standing next to are also going to be harmed. And Israel is accountable for those harms because it violated the principle of distinction and the principle of precaution under international humanitarian law. If there's some ghoul out there that is taking joy out of the death of that little girl based upon some kind of racist idea, then I can't, I really can't help them. But as a matter of international law, that's evidence of a crime. It's not evidence of some tribal justice,
Yeah, it's really insane how people think that these rationalizations are anything but bigotry and ignorance. They have delusions. I don't even know if they have delusions of it. They either really believe it, or they know that they're lying, or they're trying to convince themselves that they have some kind of legal justification on their side. And you are here to disabuse them of that, of course. I don't want to engage every person who comments, but one person, I think it's a great example of how ridiculous and disingenuous some of these arguments are. So one person said, no one in Lebanon was dying before Hezbollah began a war of aggression against Israel. That's just an ineluctable fact, which is hilarious because not only were people dying in Lebanon before Hezbollah even existed, Israel during its 1982 invasion was so brutal and killed so many people that Ronald Reagan picked up the phone, called Menachem Begin, told him to stop what he was doing, and called it a Holocaust. Reagan, not exactly a proud anti-Zionist.
Yeah, and ordered the Israelis to stop. But I mean, that commentator has it exactly upside down. Hezbollah was founded to repel attacks from Israel, so no one was being killed on either side of that border until. And by the way, people have to remember that Lebanon was also suffered from a brutal occupation by Israeli occupation forces. More than once, and not to mention the invasions and the attacks on all the way up to Beirut and beyond by Israeli forces, and that the only deterrent that they have enjoyed is Hezbollah to those kinds of attacks that Lebanese civilians have suffered from for so long and continue to suffer from up until today.
Yeah, we actually had a fascinating guest on Useful Idiots. I'd love to have her on this show. She's in Lebanon, though, so it's hard with the time difference. Hadi Francis is her name, and she's Christian. I mean, she's fairly secular, but she's Christian by background. She's not Muslim. She finds Hezbollah's, ideology. She doesn't share their ideology, but she says she's incredibly grateful to them because she feels that they keep people safe. I mean, again, and she's kind of and their ideology is great. It makes them really brave fighters because of what they believe. It's not what she believes in, but again, it's a fascinating discussion, and one that you can't ever have in the Western media, where the vilification of people like Hezbollah and Hamas is just, there's no conversation to be had about it. They are just villain, full stop. That's how the media presents them, which would be one thing if they were presenting Israel as terrorists, which they don't. So all of these labels that get thrown around as if they actually mean anything and aren't just weapons of prejudice are quite interesting.
Very much by design too, because this whole thing of, because if you want to move an entity that is your adversary outside the bounds of international law,
Right.
you simply declare that they're a terrorist, and then anything goes
Exactly.
at
Right.
that moment. But that's not how international law works.
Right.
It is how the United States works. It is how Israel works. It is how
Right.
other Western countries work.
And we talked about this last week, how
Not just Western countries, by the way, lots of countries on the planet. Yeah.
Right. And we talked about this last week about how the lies about the mass rape, and again, we've both been clear on this, there may have been individual rapes, we don't know, but there was not a mass campaign of rape. And we do know that there is a systemic campaign of rape committed by the Israelis. And we know that from various sources, tons of Palestinian sources, but also B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights organization. But we talked about this last week, how part of the reason that the rape narrative is so important for Zionists and defenders of Zionism, or Jewish supremacy, as Norman Finkelstein calls it, it's so important because it dehumanizes them. So once you say these people are all terrorists, or once you say these people are all rapists, then you don't have to give them any rights, because even though that's not what international humanitarian law says, and that's why atrocity propaganda is so important, because it just gets people to skip any rational analysis of things like human rights law.
Yeah, it dehumanizes, and it makes it easier then to carry out whatever atrocities you want to carry out. And we talked about last week about this idea of accusation in the mirror,
right?
And that the rape stuff is a perfect example of that.